In a remote corner of the Brazilian rainforest, where the foliage drips with the perfume of wild orchids and the canopy casts dancing shadows over placid floodplains, there lived a story older than any villager could recall. Locals spoke in hushed voices of a river goddess who guarded the waters, her domain teeming with life. She was known for her fierce protection of the pink dolphins' bottos, whose sleek forms glided through the black waters of the Amazon. For reasons as mysterious as the swirl of the currents themselves, these dolphins had earned the goddess's favour. Respect for them was respect for her. None who dwelled along the banks would dare cast a selfish eye upon the pink dolphins, lest they invite her ire. In the village of Porto da Vela, people made a living from the bounty of the river. Fish of all shapes and colours teemed beneath the surface. One only had to drop a net and wait, but tradition held that the pink dolphins were never to be harmed, never to be pursued for meat or taken as trophies. Their graceful presence was seen as an omen of good fortune. Those who listened closely on quiet nights claimed to hear the gentle sighs of the river goddess through the swish of the current, reminding everyone that these bottos were sacred to her. And so, year after year, generation after generation, local families lived alongside the dolphins in harmony. They taught their children to revere them, weaving stories of the goddess into lullabies and cautionary fables meant to instill a lasting reverence for the waters. Nobody knew the full name of the goddess or how she first came to inhabit the depths. Some said she was Yara, a powerful being with streaming hair of black pearls, who could shape-shift into a mermaid or swirl herself into the currents to travel at breathtaking speed. Others believed she floated among the white full moon above, her tears forming the tributaries that fed the great rivers. But there was one universal truth among these stories. She could hear every cry of her beloved creatures, especially the pink dolphins that sang to her underwater. And if their calls hinted at distress, she would answer in the only manner a goddess of the waters knew, through a surge of power that made oceans churn and rivers boil. Only the ignorant or the foolish refused to heed these warnings. Into this world came Ignacio, a fisherman blessed with skill but cursed by greed. He arrived in Porto da Vela in search of fish to sell at nearby markets. Rumours abounded that he cared nothing for local customs and revered no gods but coins. A tall, gaunt man, he bore a weathered face from years of battling the sun on his boat, and his eyes were as cold as the glare off the water at midday. His nets were large, his boat well provisioned, and his thirst for profit boundless. Even so, the townspeople tried to remain welcoming, for they believed in neighbourliness. They warned him, "Mind the pink dolphins. Harm one, and you invite great misfortune." Ignacio would nod politely, tipping his straw hat, but as he ambled away, he would mumble under his breath that such superstitions were childish. Not long after his arrival, Ignacio started hauling in more fish than anyone else. He would set out before dawn, guiding his boat through thick mists, returning by sundown with nets brimming to the point of tearing. He quickly gained a reputation for extravagance. Gold trinkets began dangling from his neck, and he made boastful speeches in the village square about how the old ways were flawed. Hungry for more attention, he scoffed at the notion of a protective goddess. "I only see pink dolphins that eat up the fish. They're competition," he observed with grim practicality. Most villagers froze at such talk, glancing nervously toward the swirling waters as though the goddess might emerge right then and there, her face dark with rage. But nothing happened immediately, so Ignacio felt emboldened. He laughed at the local myths, saying only someone simple-minded would kneel to a spirit beneath the surface. Though the villagers were horrified, no one could deny that Ignacio's catches were massive. A few local youths, amazed at his luck, offered to help on his boat, enticed by the prospect of wealth. At first they followed him without question. Day after day they cast nets into the swirling waters, ignoring the pointed fins of the pink dolphins that approached curiously. Ignacio's heavy bottom nets would sometimes snag more than fish, And on a few occasions, the scaly writhing of a captured catfish came alongside a struggling boto. The youths watched in alarm as Ignacio, with a dismissive curse, would cut loose the injured dolphin, showing no remorse. They whispered about his actions, uncertain of how much longer they could bear witness to such cruelty. One evening, after discarding a wounded dolphin back into the water, Ignacio noticed a strange hush descend. Where once the waters buzzed with the life of frogs, crickets, and nightbirds, an eerie stillness took over. It seemed the entire rainforest was holding its breath. Far across the river, near a dark bend wrapped in a canopy of ancient trees, the outline of a tall figure emerged. She stood in the shallow waters, her posture unyielding. Though the dimming light obscured her features, her presence radiated otherworldly grace and quiet fury. This could only be the river goddess. Ignacio's blood ran cold, but just as quickly he hardened himself. No voice called out, no swirling vortex formed. Instead, the figure vanished as the last rays of sun sank below the horizon. Ignacio allowed himself a sneer. "If that's all the goddess can do, she must be powerless indeed," he murmured. The next morning, rumor reached the village that one of the pink dolphins had been found dead along a downstream sandbank. The poor creature's dorsal fin was tangled in netting that bore marks identical to Ignacio's. Always quick to spread gossip, several fishermen confronted him in the crowded marketplace. "Dolphins don't deserve this. You'll bring down the goddess's wrath on us all," they shouted. Unrepentant and bold, Ignacio retorted, "Then let her come. I'm not afraid of old wives' tales." Alarmed, some villagers rushed to the shrine dedicated to the goddess. A simple wooden structure by the river's edge, draped with ribbons of yellow, green, and gold. They prayed fervently, asking her to spare the innocent from the punishment that might fall upon the guilty. As if in response, the skies darkened with surprising swiftness, though it was still morning. Thick clouds gathered overhead, swirling hides of grey and black, blocking out the sun's warmth. The wind began to howl, rustling the tall palms. The entire river seemed to pulse with a foreboding energy, and the once bright day descended into dimness. Startled, people hurried to secure their boats and take shelter indoors. Children clutched the arms of their parents, eyes wide with fear. Lightning forked across the sky, followed by thunder that rumbled like the roar of a colossal beast. The downpour that followed was unlike any weather event in recent memory. Sheets of rain lashed the banks, turning the red earth into thick mud. Ignacio, headstrong and determined, and still bristling with arrogance, refused to believe the storm had anything to do with the goddess's wrath. He busied himself covering his boat, not out of fear, but to protect his precious cargo and supplies from being damaged. "A monsoon," he muttered. "An unlucky break, that is all." Yet, even as he fought against the gale, the wind tore through the village, with toppling large trees like matchsticks. The once calm water hammered against the banks, eroding large chunks of soil and dragging them downstream. Plumes of raging waves reached well above normal levels, battering the stilted huts of fishermen along the shoreline. One by one, the structures either collapsed or were swept away entirely, leaving families scrambling for higher ground. The entire settlement seemed on the cusp of destruction. In the midst of this chaos, as residents huddled inside their sturdier brick houses, the pink dolphins rose from the churning water. With strange composure, they surfaced in groups near the center of the river, their expressions impossible for human eyes to read. Some villagers, peering through battered windows or from behind fallen logs, murmured in awe. Though battered by the torrential downpour, the dolphins did not appear fearful. Their presence radiated a quiet, unnatural calm. One child whispered that perhaps they were praying to the goddess for peace. Then, from beneath the roiling water, just beyond the dolphins, the figure of the goddess appeared again, fully visible this time. She was tall, her dark hair streaming like a living waterfall. Her eyes shone with fierce luminescence, reflecting both sorrow and righteous fury. Raising her arms, she summoned the river's power. A spectacular sight unfolded that made even brash Ignacio pause. The river itself seemed to heave upward, cresting in the form of colossal waves akin to the ocean's swells. Channels of water swirled around the goddess, spinning into a vortex of translucent green that glowed from within. Lightning flickered above, each flash illuminating the goddess's stern visage. She stretched out a hand, and the swirling water slammed into the banks, ripping out the old dock where Ignacio had tied his boat. Wood splintered, and the boat, with all its cargo, lurched into an uncontrollable spin, carried by the raging current. Ignacio leaped onto what remained of the dock, trying to retrieve his precious nets, but the wave crashed, sweeping him out to the center of the river. Panicked cries erupted along the shore as villagers witnessed the fishermen vanish beneath the swirling depths. Held underwater by the wild surge, Ignacio fought to surface. As the furious swirl carried him and his boat along, battered by logs and debris, he thought he caught a glimpse of the goddess's face beneath the current. He opened his mouth to yell, and river water rushed in, choking him. In a moment of terror, he felt something firm yet gentle push him upward. Breaking the surface, he discovered he had floated into a calmer patch of the river, far from the village. Dizzy and spluttering, he clung to a piece of drifting wood. The pink dolphins were all around him, watching with obsidian eyes. A wave of guilt washed over him then, for the memory of his cruelty was fresh in their presence. Yet no words came to his lips. He was too exhausted, too shocked to speak. Time blurred as the storm raged on. The river goddess drew water into a whirling tower, swirling it around her in arcs. She turned her attention now to the battered village, where entire families cried out for mercy. Many prayed she would be appeased. Perhaps her anger was directed solely at the fishermen who had so brazenly disrespected her beloved dolphins. But the goddess's fury had been summoned, and now her waters would take their toll. Fearful that more destruction was imminent, the villagers poured every ounce of supplication into their prayers. Elderly matriarchs wept openly, recalling the old teachings about the goddess's compassion once her justice had been exacted. Ignacio drifted for what felt like hours, although it may have been minutes. Through the downpour, he saw battered huts, fallen trees, and swirling debris pass by. Relentless lightning cracked overhead, and thunder rattled the very air. Then, subdued as if by a sudden whim, the storm grew quieter. The sheets of rain softened, and the wind's howl dwindled into a haunting whistle. The goddess slowly lowered her arms, letting the swirling tower of water collapse into the river's mighty flow. Darkness still loomed in the sky, but the worst of her wrath seemed to have passed. When the current calmed enough for him to swim, Ignacio let go of the wood and gingerly paddled to the nearest stretch of exposed sand. He was shivering violently, teeth chattering. Though relief at surviving the watery assault skimmed his thoughts, deeper inside, a smouldering fear clung to his heart. He craned his neck, believing the goddess might be lurking behind him or above him, ready to unleash another torrent. But nothing stirred except the receding waves. The pink dolphins had vanished as well, leaving him alone. Soaked and ragged, he trudged along the muddied beach, scanning for any sign of the village or a safe path back. At last, when the rain had diminished to a drizzle, Ignacio came upon a small clearing. He recognized the place vaguely. It was downstream of Porto de Vela, near an abandoned fisher's hut that had collapsed years ago. Weary beyond words, he huddled under the ruined overhang, cursing the day he had arrived here. He thought to himself angrily that the goddess and her cursed pink dolphins had driven him to ruin. Yet, even clutching his anger, part of him understood that his own disrespect had awakened a force far beyond a mere superstition. Exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of churning black waters and the silent, wise gaze of dolphins. Morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the parting clouds. The storm's aftermath revealed devastation. Fallen trees blocked paths, battered boats lay overturned, and debris was strewn all around. Ignacio walked carefully along the riverbank, heading in the direction of the village. It was not long before he encountered fellow survivors. Men and women dragged themselves through sludge, some carrying children, others guiding the elderly. Unable to bear the shame and guilt any longer, he approached them with a lowered gaze, half expecting to be driven off by furious townspeople. To his surprise, they did not assault him, but merely stared, sorrowful and tired. One fisherman, his brow caked in mud, said, "You must ask for forgiveness. It's the only way to stop further destruction." A few survivors nodded in agreement. Distraught, Ignacio pressed onward until he reached what remained of Porto de Vela. Entire families worked to salvage their belongings from broken homes, coaxing out bits of furniture from the wreckage, collecting damp clothing and searching for missing valuables. Despite the tragedy, there was a sense of relief that the storm had not taken more lives. The villagers glanced warily at Ignacio, but no one spoke a word of blame. Guilt settled on him like a stone in his chest. Memories of injured dolphins, the goddess's haunting stare, and his own laughter at the local beliefs converged in a swirl of regret. An elder named Aline, known for her deep knowledge of the region's folklore, stepped forward. Though old and frail, she moved with a resolute purpose. "The goddess is fierce, but her love for her creations is even fiercer," she said. "Totos are the children of these waters, and you have wounded them. Your net strangled the life from one of her beloved. For that, we all have suffered." Her voice shook slightly, for it was no small thing to speak for the goddess. "If you truly regret your actions, you must journey to the heart of the river." She pointed to the horizon, where thick forest concealed countless winding tributaries, buffered. "There, a hidden lagoon leads to a sacred place where the pink dolphins gather to sing. Offer your atonement, and if your plea is honest, the goddess may grant you mercy." Though exhaustion weighed down every step, Ignacio accepted, for what else could he do? If there was a chance to end this calamity and address the unrelenting sorrow that gnawed at him, he had to take it. With a small group of villagers, including 2 experienced guides, he set off in a rebuilt canoe, navigating a labyrinth of lush greenery and swirling eddies. Silence draped the journey, apart from the rhythmic dip of paddles. Hours passed. The forest walls rose around them in silent witness, vines drooping like curtains of disapproval. The floodwaters had receded slightly, but the devastation remained evident. Occasionally they passed floating trunks or the shattered remains of makeshift huts. At last they arrived at a lagoon encircled by dense foliage. The surface was still and mirror-like, reflecting the broad leaves and the overcast sky. A faint pink glow beneath the water told them the Botos were present, silently waiting. Ignacio's heart pounded. As the canoe drifted to the center, dozens of sleek pink forms surfaced in a graceful circle. Their eyes, black and unfathomable, seemed to question him. Then, across the lagoon, the waters shimmered and the goddess emerged again, rising from the depths without so much as a ripple. She appeared both ethereal and formidable, her hair swirling around her shoulders as though caught in a soft current. Trembling, Ignacio dropped to his knees in the canoe. He tried to speak but found only racked gasps. Hot tears mingled with the river's spray. The other villagers bowed their heads, not daring to look at the goddess directly. Finally, in a voice choked with remorse, Ignacio managed words of apology. He spoke of his ignorance, his callousness, and the deadly harm he had inflicted upon the river's cherished creatures. Overwhelmed, he promised to change, to honor the goddess and her dolphins should he be granted a second chance. "Please, spare these people I have endangered," he gasped. "Punish me if you must, but show them mercy." The goddess listened in solemn silence, her gaze weighing each syllable. Then, as though gripped by an invisible wind, the surface of the lagoon began to swirl, forming a ring of gently spiraling ripples. The pink dolphins parted, offering the center of the circle. The goddess placed her hand upon the water, and a luminous wave rippled outward, illuminating the lagoon in a radiant glow. Ignacio felt a warmth envelop him, cutting through his fear. Gradually, the tightness in his chest eased, and though he dared not lift his eyes from the canoe's floor, he sensed the goddess's stern expression soften into something almost compassionate. A shimmering thread of light rose from the water, hovering momentarily beside Ignacio. He understood, in some intuitive, primal way, that this was a sign of acceptance, a testament to the goddess's willingness to allow repentance. As the glow spread, it coiled itself around him for a fleeting moment before dissipating. The circle of dolphins broke formation, gliding closer, as if curious to see the transformation in the man who had once treated them so cruelly. Each movement felt like a silent conversation, a negotiation of trust. Finally, the dolphins scattered, diving back into the lagoon's depths. The goddess, her purpose fulfilled, sank into the shining water without a word, leaving only a fading phosphorescence on the surface. For a few minutes, the canoe drifted in stunned quiet. Then the villagers looked up, exchanging glances of awe and relief. A rainbow, subtle at first, crept across the cloud-laden sky, forming a gentle arc above the lagoon. Ignacio let out the breath he had been holding. Though his soul still trembled with the weight of his deeds, something within him felt reborn. The boat turned back, guides paddling with renewed vigor. He knew that his apology alone could not erase the tragedy he had caused, nor would it bring back the life he had taken. But it marked the beginning of a pledge to do right by these waters. When they emerged from the tangle of tributaries, they found the main river calmer than it had been in weeks, as though the wrath had been replaced by a fragile serenity. The destruction across Porto de Vela remained, but the storm clouds had finally dispersed, allowing golden sunlight to bathe the battered village. Over the coming weeks, neighbors banded together to rebuild. Ignacio wielded hammer and saw, sweating from dawn until dusk, no longer driven by lust for coin but by a sincere desire for redemption. He helped patch roofs, gather stray livestock, and replant seedlings along the damaged riverbanks. Gone was the pompous man who had boasted about his wealth. In his place was a humbler figure, grateful simply for a chance to earn the villagers' forgiveness. Occasionally, the pink dolphins would swim up to the banks, tails flicking in greeting. On such occasions, Ignacio would set aside his tools, approach solemnly, and toss them fish, always, ensuring they were unharmed and collected with sustainable nets. Villagers watched this transformation and began to accept his efforts. Slowly, the fear lingered less in their eyes, replaced by tentative smiles. The children, once terrified of his wrath, now saw him as a reformed man striving to correct his ways. Day by day, the settlement rose from the wreckage, leaning on the shoulders of unity and respect for the old traditions. Fishermen who once refused to set foot in a boat with Ignacio now invited him along, trusting that he had learned the sacred lesson. Whispered prayers were once again offered at the small shrine by the river. Ribbons of yellow, green, and gold fluttered in the gentle breeze, signifying gratitude for the goddess's mercy. The memory of the storm would remain etched in every broken beam and waterlogged foundation. The villagers had accepted it as part of a deep lesson. One does not lightly disrespect the Boros, or ignore the power that dwells beneath the water's surface. Ignacio carried a lasting sense of remorse and responsibility. Yet within that sorrow blossomed a new reverence for the living tapestry of rainforest and river. Many nights he wandered close to the bank, listening to the nighttime chorus, the chirp of insects, the croak of frogs, and the melodic whistles of pink dolphins. Sometimes he thought he heard a distant whisper in the current, a gentle hum reminding him to be vigilant in his duty to protect and nurture what he had once thought worthless. And when the slightest ripple of pink broke the moonlit surface, he would close his eyes and whisper his thanks or his sorrow, whichever felt heavier in that moment. He had discovered in the end that the goddess's wrath indeed could be fearsome, but it was exceeded only by her capacity for forgiveness, provided respect and genuine remorse were equally mighty. Life continued, as life must. Seasons shifted, bringing new floods and fresh breezes. The forest once again wrapped the village in green. Children grew older, and elders passed their knowledge to the next generation. Even travellers from distant regions came by, speaking of how the pink dolphins thrived in Porto de Vela, unafraid of human boats. They told stories of a fisherman who had found redemption after a great storm nearly wiped the settlement off the map. And every time a newcomer asked about the river goddess, the villagers would nod gravely and recount the legend, how she guarded the pink dolphins with an unbreakable bond, how her rage summoned storms like no normal tempest, and how, after unveiling her might, she could extend compassion to those who sought atonement with open hearts. And so the river remained the source of both livelihood and mystery, a living thread weaving the people, the dolphins, and the goddess together. From that day onward, no one who lived by or visited Porto de Vela would forget that a goddess watched from just below the surface, attentive to the cruelty and kindness of humans alike. For the goddess and her pink dolphins were inseparable guardians of the Amazon's soul, and in respecting one, you respected them all.